Like when I came of age, album covers were, they were everywhere, and so that they were the first things that really like, that I spent time with, really like looking at for long periods of time. So they were probably the first influence on me visually and in terms of, artistic development. And then in the 80s, going to video stores was actually like kind of a profound experience. They were like little museums. So you could go and like, I'd go straight to the horror section and there would be like rows of shelves, kind of like a record store. The higher the shelf, the more expensive the record. And so the top shelf was, the real heavy horror stuff, like I Spit on Your Grave and, Fulci films and things like that. And, these big shell case video boxes that had like really garish artwork on them. And that was a big influence too. And then I used to skip school and go down to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So instead of going to school, I would just take the train to the Metropolitan Museum and spend 8 hours like looking at artwork. And then I would take the train back home and try to make it so that my mom wouldn't know that that I wasn't at school. But those were really formative days because I could wander through the museum and I could see a Egyptian pyramid, and then I could go and see instruments from New Zealand that were made out of human bones, and then I could go see these amazing Renaissance era paintings all in one day and just have my mind completely blown. So those were really formative moments. I think the symbolist art movement is a really important art movement for me, and underground comics, the discovery of underground comics was very profound. And I talk about this in the introduction of the book, but I accidentally found a place called Psychedelic Solution in New York City. I was actually looking for the Film Forum to go see a Vincent Price movie marathon. I got lost, and I ended up in this, I walked past this gallery that was called Psychedelic Solution, and I went in, and that was pretty much the pivotal day that I learned that there was this thing called underground comics. And that's when I learned about Robert Crumb and S. Clay Wilson, Robert Williams, Joe Coleman, Alex Gray, and
you just hit like the money spot right there.
yeah, those were that was like an epiphany. I mean, it really was like this moment where, and they had this artwork that was, stuff that if I did at school I would be in trouble. I could get expelled for, I often got in trouble for drawing in school. Back then, they didn't do things like look at young people's abilities and say like, oh, maybe we should put them into an art program. Or back then it was like if you were drawing in school, you should have been paying attention and you'd get in trouble. So to see these pretty amazing works of art when I was about 14 years old, it was really profound, because they had placed them in this environment that was a gallery setting, which made them feel sacred to me. They had painted the walls white. They had designated this spot, and this is the spot that the artwork is going to go. And I hadn't thought about it until I had to write the introduction to this book, but I think that was a profound moment for me, because it was probably the first time I got to see artwork, really visceral, offensive, really in-your-face kind of artwork, but it was placed in this environment that gave it a certain kind of sacred gravity. Like it couldn't be fucked with, if that makes sense. And I think in a weird way, that's what I was trying to recreate with the Entartete Kunts exhibits. Is to take this artwork that I love and completely peel away those sentiments of irony and lowbrow and trash culture, and really place them where they belong, which is in a sacred space. So the gallery exhibits directly came out of my zine, Destroying Angels, which I first started publishing, I think around May 1998. So I started working on it in 1997 and put the first issue out in 98. And it was really meant to be an underground publication that focused on underground artwork, which is something that I felt was lacking in the self-published world at the time. There weren't that many zines that were doing that kind of thing. And so I did about 8 or 9 issues, I think, and wanted to take it to the next level. You know, as an artist, you always want to develop your craft, you know, to make it bigger and better, and maybe insert it into the world in a more visceral kind of way. And so the next logical thing to do would be to get these artists together in a real place, and you know, a place that people could come and really commune with the art and engage with the art directly, and maybe even meet the artists and talk to them, and really make it like a real world event. And part of that was you know, like a quiet protest against the internet movement or whatever cultural force that, you know, everything had become cyber or virtual, and I wanted to really promote the idea that this has to be real. Like works have to exist in the real world, and so the first show was in 2007, and I invited just you know, some friends that I'd interviewed previously in the zine, and it came together really easily and very quickly. People just sent their artwork, and yeah, it turned out to be, I think, modestly successful. There were way more people there than I thought, and people resonated with the idea more than I thought that they would. I thought people might not get it, or people wouldn't show up, but people came and people stayed, and people were excited, and then after the show, people were emailing me, and it was up for a whole month, and people kept going back. And there was it was a little tattoo shop on Alberta called Optic Nerve Arts, which is who hosted that first one, and they would tell me, you know, people are coming in every day to see this stuff, you know. So it really worked. It kind of did what it was meant to do, and so I continued it in 2008 and again in 2009. I think it extends even to you know, wanting to promote album cover artwork as a legitimate art form itself, without it being ironic or kitschy or lowbrow, or, you know, these flippant terms that are meant to marginalize a certain kind of artwork in a dismissive manner that will exclude it from historical context. You know, and so in promoting album cover artwork as legitimate art, it's also promoting artwork that you can hold in your hands, hand to a friend, give as a gift. You can't do that with MP3 or, you know, iTunes or whatever people are using to listen to music. So I stand very much opposed to like download culture, meaning that, you know, young people have access to all the information in the world these days, but without the context that gives it meaning, and without that personal relationship that one has with artwork that's meaningful to them, it becomes meaningless. It's just information then. And, you know, there's something sensual about it too, because at the end of the day, this is art, and it's meant to engage the senses. It's not just meant to be a commodity, like a commercial unit. It's not just meant to be like a status symbol, or you know, something that, you know, you can forge an identity or have a scene around. It's meant to engage your senses, and so there's something very sensual about the smell of ink, or the feel of a page on your fingers, or the smell of incense that are burning in the gallery the night of the opening. You know, I talk in the introduction about, there was this moment at one of the receptions where I finally was able to exhale, you know, because so much work went into it. But there was a moment where I was able to exhale and like look around the room and enjoy this like intoxicating smell of wine and marijuana and sweat, and there were these like freight train hopping kids who had like hopped all the way from Minneapolis to be at the opening, and you could smell the train soot in their clothes. It was all mingling together in the room in a very real way, in a very like ritualistic way, and you can't get that online. Sensual is the word, but people often mistake that for being sexual, but sensual meaning your senses, right? You know, you want to be able to touch it, smell it, see it. If you could fucking lick it, you would, you know what I mean? But that's the idea. I mean, I think that's why people go to, you know, metal concerts. They want the visceral experience of bodies, you know, banging into one another, and they want to they want that sort of, I think some of us just crave that sort of interaction with the art. Everybody that I invited to be in the shows was great. Sort of honored to do it, and I didn't have to, twist anybody's arm or anything like that. There were a few people who I would have liked to have included who either didn't follow up or it was difficult to track down. Sakevi from the Japanese band Gizm was one of them. I've been a fan of his artwork for a long time, and really deeply resonate with some of the things that he's done. But he's really difficult to get in touch with. He has sort of like, it seems as though he has a ring of people fielding his emails, and yeah. Someday I would like to have Sakevi in a art exhibit, but he's one of the few that comes to mind that I invited and just never was able to get through to him. So, but most people were great, and didn't hesitate to ship original work, in many cases all the way across, the world. So Entartete Kunts is a mispronunciation of the German term Entartete Kunst, which means degenerate art. I think loosely translated means degenerate art. And it's a term that was sort of popularized by the Nazi regime, Nazi Germany. It was a term that was coined to basically politicize modern art movement, and it was used by the Nazi Party in an effort to sort of marginalize artists that Hitler felt were against his ideals for what Germany should represent. So what he did is he organized an exhibit, or he had his arts minister of arts actually organized the exhibit, and they put together an exhibit of modern art, what they thought was artwork that sort of undermined ideas of womanhood and German manhood and nationality and German well-being, I think, or genetic well-being even. And they put on this exhibit that they called Entartete Kunst, and it was meant to be a mockery. When they hung the artwork, they purposefully hung the artwork crooked so that it looked like, it was just thrown on the walls with very little regard. And the exhibits were organized according to themes, like, paintings that put womanhood down, or paintings that undermined manhood, things like that. And you were meant to go there almost like a freak show, and you were meant to go and like laugh at the artwork and see how terrible things had become, and therefore we need Hitler and his party to sort of clean house and get rid of these degenerates. And after the main exhibit, it traveled throughout Germany to a few different locations. It was hugely popular. Many people came to this exhibit. And then after it was over, they sort of routinely or ritually burned a lot of the paintings. And of course, these were works of art that would go for fortunes nowadays. And when I was a teenager and, studying history and learning about things like Nazi Germany, the idea that art could be such a powerful thing that a political party had to make a stance on it really resonated with me, because I already felt as though artwork was this profound thing. For me, it was like akin to, I think, what the experience that people get from religion, I got from artwork. Even artwork like album cover artwork. And so the idea that artwork was such a powerful force that, the Nazis had to do this strategic, sort of politicized movement against it really resonated with me and kind of stuck with me. Ultimately, to answer your question, though, the name of the book is just a play on words. It's me basically saying degenerate cunts. It's a terrible slur. It's meant to chase away a certain kind of pretentiousness that I also feel that I'm opposed to, and chase away people who are overly sensitive. It's almost meant to be, I've joked before and said that the name of the book is almost meant to be like the skull on the bottle of poison, warning you, like, don't drink it, or if you're offended by the title, maybe there's other books for you. Don't even enter.
Don't enter.
Yeah, if you are a false.
Right? If you are false.
Yeah, do not entry.
Right. Do not entry. You're not convinced.
Yeah. So Entartete Kunts is my way of saying if you are a false, do not entry. And so far, so good. It's working well. It's keeping a lot of people out. It's really just a joke, so I don't want to make it any more, profound or, imbue it with any false meaning, because really it's just a funny joke. It's a play on words. It's meant to be silly. And I think it's deceptively silly because there is something underneath it that's a little bit foreboding. And there is a sense of, this is artwork that's been pushed so far to the fringes of artwork that it's almost not part of the dialogue, artistic dialogue. And I see it as the center. So, yeah. The book is really the culmination of Destroying Angels. And so, as the creator of both the zine and the book, I would say the book really trumps the zine and in a lot of ways makes the zine obsolete. So I feel good that people can get their hands on the book and they almost don't have to worry about back issues of the zine, because a lot of the artists that I covered in the zine are covered in the book in a much richer way, because of course Destroying Angels was my attempt of keeping self-publication alive at a time in the late 90s when independent publishing was it had peaked and was kind of dwindling as the internet started gaining popularity and became less expensive. It almost felt like overnight in the late 90s, everybody stopped producing zines and started making websites. Really terrible looking, primitive, horrible websites, but they did make that switch. And so Destroying Angels was my attempt of keeping this culture that was important to me alive, like cut and paste, hands covered in glue stick, going to Kinko's at like 3 a.m. and scamming copies, by hook or by crook, trying not to pay for them.
That's funny.
And that's how the zine was made. It was cut and pasted, and it was made as I could and when I could, and I made like a few hundred copies of each issue and sent them out to whoever asked for them, and sold them in whatever zine shops were still around back then. But I did 10 issues over the course of about 10 years, so it was about roughly an annual zine. And I think in a lot of ways the book really encompasses what I was trying to do with the zine. So get the book, and at some point maybe I'll do a small run of each issue again. I don't know, because I get asked that a lot. But the only thing missing from the book that the zine had was I did fairly unedited interviews with artists, but a lot of that stuff I'm reproducing on my blog, so people can just access it for free. The idea is really just if you're interested in exploring artwork, I want you to be able to have access to that information. But I do value the hunt. I don't want to make it too easy for people. But I do know that there's enough passionate, dedicated people in the world still today who will look a little deeper than others to find information. So I think a lot of it's out there, actually. Yeah, Unseen Forces is a record label that I run with a close friend of mine named Tyler, and he asked me to start a label with him, and we conceived the idea of running a very small, oddly curated record label that would only focus on things that we both felt really strongly about. In other words, we didn't want to start a highly specialized record label, that would focus on bestial war metal only, or black metal only, or punk only. We're both old enough and have been around music long enough to have a really broad array of interests and influences and tastes, and we wanted to conceive of a record label that could put out a horror soundtrack one month and a punk record another month and a metal record another month, and sort of alienate people as we go would be fine, because the idea would be we would constantly be attracting new people to the label, and sort of weeding people out as we go, whatever, that was okay. So it just was really like a labor of love kind of thing. We wanted to put records out that we felt really strongly about, regardless of genre or marketability, or So we started really small, very humbly, small pressings, and so far we've put out 8 records. The first one was we did a vinyl pressing of the Christian Mistress demo, which we both really liked and wanted to help sort of promote at the time. And then we put out, I probably won't have the order right because I can't really remember the order of things, but we did after that Death Charge, which is one of my favorite local Portland bands that are doing something very special and very unique. So we put out their first 12-inch record. And then we did a couple of reissues. We reissued a band called The Law, which was a band from 1984. They were members of the Source Family cult, which some people have heard of through like Yahweh 13 and bands like that. But they splintered off from the Source Family cult, and they started like a heavy metal band in Los Angeles. I think they even maybe opened for Motley Crue in like '84. They made this one record called None Escape, and then they kind of vanished. And it's a really weird, eclectic, sexual, visionary record that's totally odd and strange, and doesn't come around much, but when it does, people pay like $300 for it. And so we were lucky to find them in Hawaii and get their permission to reproduce the record, and they wrote liner notes, and it was really just a way of getting this record back into circulation that we thought was important for people to hear in an affordable format. And then we did a bootleg 7-inch from a band called Astaroth that nobody knows really much about. They're like a mystery. They're like an enigma. They only put this one thing out, and we think it's from 1975. This is like a really obscure, basically like a garage rock band from the early 70s. The best we can nail it down to is probably like early 70s, maybe 73 to 75. We're not entirely sure. And even that date we're only able to approximate from like a serial number that you can see on the original 45. But it's a really hard to find 45, and so we decided to just bootleg it in a really small number. We couldn't locate any of the band members. We're kind of hoping they'll crawl out of the woodwork and contact me now that it's out. But anyway, it's an amazing piece of musical history that we felt needed to be back in the world. So we repressed that. And we just did the demos for the very first Donovan recordings, the Donovan demos. We put on vinyl, and we just put out the new Death Charge 12-inch, which just came out about, I guess, a couple months ago now. So Grave Command's actually a perfect example of an Unseen Forces records, because it's kind of like triple suicide in the music industry to create a holiday themed compilation picture disc. That's like a triple no in the record industry. You don't do a holiday themed record because it has a really short shelf life, and if you don't sell it, it's a disaster. You don't put out a compilation record because people tend to not buy them, which is why labels like Hell's Headbangers, they'll give them away for free, but they won't really sell those kinds of records because they don't sell very well. And then picture discs are just this like oddity format that really almost doesn't really exist anymore. So of course Unseen Forces had to create a holiday themed compilation and make it a picture disc.
Double, like
Triple
bam!
bad marketing. But at the same time, it's this record that we really believe in, we really love, and I think, of course, I'm biased, but I think it's this incredible record. So that's sort of exactly what we wanted to do with Unseen Forces, records like that. I think just sheer stubbornness, like being around as long as I have now, and I think if you stick at what you do long enough, people finally start to hear it or see it, and I think that's probably what happened. I think a pivotal moment was a friend of mine named Matt, who used to play in a band called Dr. Shrinker, who was also friends with Chris Reifert, mentioned to Chris, that there's this guy, Dennis Dredd, you should talk to him and get him to do artwork for you. And so I have Matt to thank, because one day I got a phone call from Chris Reifert completely out of the blue, asking me to do artwork for Abscess. And Chris and I hit it off right away. I felt like I'd known him my whole life. We have the same influences. We have very similar musical taste. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's completely non-judgmental, just the sweetest, most down-to-earth guy you could ever meet. And so we really just resonated with one another right away. And I started to do artwork for Abscess, and that led to me being asked to do the Autopsy DVD, Dark Crusades, and the live album Dead as Fuck. And I never asked, but I think that it was Abscess and Autopsy artwork that the Dark Throne guys saw. And so again, I got an email out of the blue from Nocturno Culto. Well, the first thing I want to say about the book is that the book looks amazing because I had an amazing woman work with me on the book, and her name is Anna Wilson. So I want to say her name formally on camera. She's credited as A.K. Wilson, but without A.K. Wilson, the book wouldn't look as amazing as it looks. I mean, she really became a partner. She was taken on as sort of she very graciously accepted a commission, but she very, very quickly became very much a creative partner in the process in a lot of ways. And she has a great aesthetic, and she is amazing to work with, and so I want to say that first of all. And the book turned out exactly how I wanted it to turn out, in that it has a combination of sort of what I call elders, people like Joseph Smith, who did the Bathory Goat, people like S. Clay Wilson, who basically pioneered underground comics in the 60s and became a real influence on a lot of us younger guys. But then mixed in with them are a lot of people who no one's ever heard of, like really underground folks, like Reuben Story, who's a young emerging cartoonist from Olympia, Washington, or Chanel from Lebenden Toten here in Portland. Musta Orenko from Russia, who many people haven't heard of, and she's a much younger emerging artist. And so for me, it was really important to combine well-known names, people like Ed Repka, who everyone has seen Megadeth album covers at this point, with people who you would never see maybe if they weren't allowed this moment to have a context for their work. And I think that worked out really well. I think it underscores one of the themes of the book, which is that there's a lineage of underground artwork, and that the proverbial big pen gets passed from one generation to another, and there's different threads that get picked up by younger people, and people take what's been done in the past and they reinterpret it in new times. They provide a new context, they provide new meaning, but that there is this sort of continuum of artwork that you can sort of trace back, and atavistic is the word that I frequently use in the book to sort of explain the germ of an idea, or the seed of an idea that sort of comes to fruition at a very unexpected time, in a very unexpected way. And I think that comes through in the book in a way, yeah. And so the book was made, it's limited edition, 1,000. Originally it was going to be only hardcover, and then we realized as I was making the book and I kept adding art and wanting everybody to be really well represented, I talked to my publisher, and I was kind of like, this book is becoming very large, like 340 pages large, and I have a great publisher who was completely hands-off, no censorship, virtually no limitations. Create the book that you want to make. We'll find a way to make it happen. That was more or less the unspoken agreement. So the book became very expensive and very heavy to mail. And so we had to come up with a solution, because the hardcover book to ship internationally costs as much as the book itself. So if you're buying a $50 hardcover book and you live in Russia, you're going to pay $100, maybe even more than $100 to receive the book. So the solution that we came up with was keep the book limited to 1,000, but we'll produce 400 hardcover copies and 600 paperback copies, because the paperback weighs considerably less than the hardbound. So it puts it makes it accessible to a broader range of people who I want the book to be accessible to. And so we expect it to sell out relatively quickly. It's been available for less than a month, and it's been selling quite well, and it probably won't be around much longer. That's not that wasn't designed to make a really cult, obscure, hard to get collector's item that people would flip on eBay in a month. That was merely the only cost-effective way to make a book of this kind. Is we had to keep it limited to a finite number that we could manage to pull off in production. So who knows, maybe down the road we'll do a second edition or a revised edition. That would be really exciting for me. But the book is available through Ajna Bound, which is the publication offshoot of the Ajna Offensive, which is, in my mind, one of the only American record labels that has been going as strong for as long as it has, and is credible and ethical in all the right ways. Just a great record label that takes a great degree of care and attention when they create products to put out. They don't just crank things out because they're fashionable or to make money. There's a lot of intent and purpose behind each release, and so it was an honor to work with Ajna on the book, and I think the production values speak for themselves on the book. The book is really beautifully crafted and impeccably produced and printed, and I'm very pleased with it, frankly. There's things I would do differently, and there's things I would do better next time. Of course, it's the first book I've ever worked on, but overall, for something that was more or less a DIY production, I'd never made a book before. Yeah, it turned out rather well.
said you're so